My name is Paul Larson, and this project is part of my Arizona State University Capstone 3 course being supervised by Dr. Bridget Seeley for my master's degree in sociology. I would like to discuss a very important topic that has received a lot of media attention lately: minimum wage. There has been a push to raise the minimum wage substantially within the next few years, and I will discuss some background on minimum wage, the supporters of raising the wage, and why opponents of it feel that it will do more harm than good. So looking here, minimum wage is like the big elephant in the room, although in this case the elephant is in the hole. We all see it, but we don't know how to fix the problem. How did this little guy get there, and how in the heck are we going to raise him up out of his troubles? What was your first job? Take a moment and just think to yourself about your first job. Do you remember your first boss? Did you have to wear a uniform? How did you get there? Did your parents give you rides? Did your friends give you rides? How much did you make an hour? How big was your paychecks? When you'd get paid every 2 weeks, how big were those paychecks? Now thinking about that, when you got your first job and you got your first paycheck, how many of you were ready to drop out of school, move out from your parents, and go out and support yourself on your own, feeling confident that you could provide yourself everything that you desired? Probably not very many of us. First job usually is just a start. I know we all have pretty fond memories of our first jobs, hopefully, and some not so fond memories as well, but that's kind of all part of the process. So looking here is the leaky bucket. So basically we're trying to plug up these holes, and every time we plug up a hole somewhere, another one seems to spring up. Now if you look up there crossed off at the top, $7.25. The current federal minimum wage right now is $7.25 per hour, and there are currently 29 states in the District of Columbia who have minimum wages above the federal minimum wage. So that is just the minimum that any business has to pay employees, but some states can choose to pay more. So like I said, 29 states are already paying more than this. California and New York are leading the way, lobbying to try to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2022. So it is a little bit over 5 years away, but that would be more than double an increase for any states that are at the federal minimum wage. Some states that pay more, it wouldn't be quite as much as double, but it would still be quite a significant raise to workers by 2022. The federal minimum wage. I'd like to talk a little bit about this. How much do you think you know? In order to look at whether this change could be beneficial, we need to first look at how it is currently set up and why, as well as what additional costs employers have to pay and how a substantial wage increase could actually be detrimental to certain workers and society in general. So here's some things about the federal minimum wage. Just look at those for a moment. So the federal minimum wage does not adjust for inflation. So as prices for products go up, minimum wage stays the same. It's only increased a few times in the last 30 years. There has been no minimum wage increase since 1998. So it's been almost 20 years since there's been an actual federally required raise to the minimum wage. And in that time, 8.1% of buying power has been lost. So inflation has gone up, prices have gone up, and the wage has remained the same now for almost 20 years. So, were you aware of these components? Most people, when they hear minimum wage, they don't always think about everything that it entails. So, looking at this information, now it does seem like a raise to the minimum wage is due, and I feel that yes, it should be raised, but not to the levels that are being recommended. Living wage. The big push, the new hot buzzword, is living wage. They're trying to get minimum wage to be enough for a person to have the living wage. And $15 an hour was chosen, and a lot of groups have formed around this. The main group is called fightfor15.org, and it has been lobbying with politicians for the last few years. It's got a lot of momentum in California, and a lot of politicians have been speaking on it. And the $15 an hour benchmark is really because a person working full-time at $15 an hour would get to $30,000 a year. So the poverty line depends on how many children you have, but it caps out at about $24,000. So this gets people well above the poverty line standard, and they're trying to have this $15 an hour living wage be the new minimum standard of acceptable living. It is also thought that this additional money will not cost as much as critics say, because a lot of the money will get spent right back into the economy right away as it's received. So here is just an advertisement for the Fight for 15 campaign. The living wage, as they say, we serve, we deserve. It says McDonald's can afford $15. Pay fair, pay 15. We can't survive on what we're making. Respect our rights. So a lot of different messages there, but they all come around the fact that current minimum wage is not enough and should be increased. Now this has really been quite a big political issue for this presidential debate. Hillary Clinton was on supporting the $15 an hour minimum wage. Donald Trump did not feel that it needed to be raised to that part, and since this presentation started, we have received a new president-elect. Donald Trump has said that he will not push to raise it to this amount, but time will tell what happens. So going back to the $15 an hour, as it says here, 15 is not 15. Most people are aware that in addition to your salary, employers have to match your portion of Social Security and Medicare taxes. So that's an additional cost that not everybody is aware of. Some companies match retirement. That's another cost if it's based on percentage of your income. And thinking at this too, a lot of smaller mom and pop type businesses will more than likely go out of business. It'd be hard to imagine that the corner grocery store could afford to pay every one of its employees at a mom and pop grocery $15 an hour. So this will place small businesses out of business. It'll also force employers to cut jobs, decrease benefits, such as tuition reimbursement and other programs like that, as well as increase costs of medical care, dental care, mental health, vision. Basically, the first area that a business is going to look to cut costs is in its non-monetary compensation towards its employees. As this graph shows here, from the Heritage Foundation, it's anticipated that a $15 an hour minimum wage, if that was working for everybody, if that was the new minimum, prices would go up 38%. Now, to help offset the prices going up, total worker hours, it's estimated, would go down 36%. Sales would go down because people couldn't afford the increased prices, and then, as you can see, there'd be a big drop to profits. Now, initial thoughts were that if we just increased pay, it'll come out of the profit margins of big business, and it would be a more equitable distribution of income. But the reality it is that companies will cut back on their non-monetary compensation for their employees. So a worker may make more money, but have higher insurance rates, loss of other benefits, and a decrease in their hours. So how much of that is really beneficial? If the extra money causes all these other things to be reduced, is that really what's most beneficial? Companies have been saying that if prices increase to this level, they'll have to lay people off, cut the portion size of meals, and even look into automation, robotics, which we will discuss later on in this presentation. So, typical workforce. Take a minute and just think to yourself who the typical workers are when you think of a minimum wage job. What's the first image that comes in your head? What's the second image? Chances are those images were probably members of the different groups that we're going to discuss. You probably thought of teenagers, people in high school or college students, as well as retirees, as well as some people may have even thought of those that have dropped out of school and or people with felony records. So when you thought of the typical workforce, you probably did not think of the big push. The Fight for 15 is saying that this is helping a lot of dual income families that are, mom and dad are together and they have kids and they're working hard and it's just not enough money. And the reality is that population group is a very small population, as we'll discuss later in the presentation. How many teenagers do you think are in the workforce? It's actually 15% of people in the workforce are teenagers. Our newest generation, the millennials, and Generation Z is coming up right around the corner. It's pretty hard to imagine. But the millennials, our newest generation that's going into the workforce now, is a very diverse, open-minded, and they're great with technology. But they do tend to lack strong interpersonal skills. Having jobs is actually a great way for them to interact more with others and work on communication skills. Most teenagers come from middle-class backgrounds, and the jobs that they have is disposable income. Increasing minimum wage is actually giving a raise to the middle class more so than it is the poor and working class. This group, the teenagers, is not one of the groups that typically complain about minimum wage needing a large increase. Teenagers see the jobs as fun social outlets or as a way to have money to pay for purses or tennis shoes or cell phones, just extra things. Most people that are teenagers that are working minimum wage jobs are not doing it to support their family. So teenagers' stance on their jobs. As I've already mentioned, most teenagers are doing it for fun part-time jobs. They're part of the middle class. This is just extra spending money and a dramatic raise to the minimum wage is really just helping the middle class. It's not helping the poor and the working class as much as it seems on the surface. Never intended for long-term comfort and sustainability. Minimum wage jobs are starter jobs. They're not intended to sustain an adult or a head of a household for a long period of time. They're generally low-skilled, simple jobs that were never meant to be long-term careers. So changing focus. So if we feel that $15 an hour is not the way to go, then where do we go? Where do we start? There is a social problem that needs to be addressed. There is a big disparity between the rich and the poor, and we do need to do something to help uplift the poor to bring them above the poverty line. But what are some other areas that we can work on? I think the focus should be on other areas such as education, social programs, focusing on high school graduation rates, decreasing crime rates, and really just focusing more towards the root of the problem rather than throwing money at the top. I kind of think of $15 an hour is spraying weed killer, and it's going to kill the weeds. It's going to make it look good for a week or two, and then the weeds are back and the problem is still there. So we really need to get down to the root of the problem, which is why do we have such poverty to begin with, and working on addressing that. And the $15 an hour is really just a superficial fix, a band-aid, and will not really help long term. Dropouts a day. How many people do we think drop out of school a day? $857 students drop out of high school every day in the United States. Less than high school graduate. How much money in the course of their work time do we think somebody makes if they have less than a high school degree? Diploma. So if you have not graduated high school, on average you will make $200,000 less over the course of your lifetime. So if we look at that dollar amount right there, getting people to stay in school, using programs that are already in place would be a much more beneficial cost savings to just get people to graduate school rather than to have them not graduate school and then pay them $15 an hour to help lift them above poverty. Crimes committed by people that don't graduate. About what percentage of crimes do you think happen from people that do not have a high school diploma? %75%. 75% of all crimes are committed by people that have not graduated high school. So getting people to graduate high school would decrease crime, which would save money, and people would make $200,000 more on average, and we wouldn't have to pay the additional money to the minimum wage. So education is definitely a strong approach. So looking at this, if we worked on education, if we got 857 people, if we got half of those people to not drop out, think of the impact that that could bring. If all of a sudden we had an extra 400 plus people earning $200,000 more in the course of their lifetime, and a decrease in crime would be significant. With the advancement in medical technology, people are living a lot longer. People are also having to work longer due to not saving enough for retirement, or some people choose to work just to stay busy and be active. So with the older generations now in the workforce, they've been known as the silent generation, the matures, or the traditionalists, how many people in this group do you think are currently in the workforce? %40 of people age 65 and above are still working. Does that number surprise you? I'll be honest and say it surprised me. It was a much larger statistic than I thought. This is up from 10 years ago when only 20% worked. So in the last 10 years, the amount of people over the age of 65 has doubled from 20 to 40%. Competition. There is now increased competition for jobs that were once for teenagers. Now these jobs are occupied by adults who never graduated high school, felons that are on parole that have gotten out and have not been able to find a more sustainable job, retirees that either did not save enough for retirement or just choose to want to still be out and about in the workforce just as part of living an active lifestyle. So there's now increased competition for jobs. Jobs that were once for teenagers are now being fought over for amongst all the groups. So looking here at this pie chart that I got off of whitehouse.gov, says raising the minimum wage would benefit more than 28 million workers and directly boost the wages of 19 million workers from all types of households. As I've said, raising the minimum wage I think is a great idea. It hasn't gone up since 1998. But double the increase in the next 5 years I think is too drastic. So looking here at our largest population in the purple here, 44% are unmarried without kids. So if we doubled the minimum wage, the biggest group that would benefit are people that do not have kids. Now as a parent myself, I can tell you kids are very expensive, and to think that all of our taxpayer money and increases in business prices to go for this minimum wage, more than, well, almost half, 44%, is basically going to go to people that don't even have kids, and that just doesn't seem like a equal distribution. Another one, looking at the dark blue next to the 44%, the 12% are people under 18. So 12% of the people getting that substantial raise, the majority of them are living at home with their parents, and it's just a raise for the middle class. Looking at that green at the bottom, 18% married without kids. So generally when people are married and they don't have any kids, they're both working. So we basically have a 2-income family, 18% getting double the raise 5 years from now. That group, again, does not really need the money. I really think these two areas, the light blue and the red, the married with kids and the unmarried with kids, is really the two groups, in my opinion, that need a boost. And, that comprises 26%, which means 74% of the people getting a raise do not need it as much as the 26% do. So I just feel that it's just not the best use of resources. What do you think? Earned income tax credit. What do you know about it? Well, the purpose of raising the minimum wage is to get a person out of poverty, and the earned income tax credit is already a safety net in place for this. Most of the poor people do not work, so how does increasing the minimum wage help lift them out of poverty if they don't even earn a wage that's going to be increased? Increasing jobs would be more beneficial than increasing the minimum wage. Most people who work minimum wage jobs are in two-income families, so again, the minimum wage increase helps the middle class and not the poor and working class. So the Earned Income Tax Credit is already a safety net in place to help raise people above the poverty level. It is a wage subsidy and it helps lift people out of poverty who work low-paying jobs. The Earned Income Tax Credit only has one scale, however, and it is being recommended that there are two opposing scales, one for times of economic downturn and one for times of economic prosperity. So they are working on testing out two different scales, but as of right now there is one, and that has been some criticism, and that's something that they're working on right now. Revamping the Earned Income Tax Credit would be more beneficial than putting extra money straight into the pockets of low-income workers. $3,582. Not a bad chunk of money. I wouldn't mind having that right now. What do we think that dollar amount is? That is actually the amount. The last time they did a major review of the Earned Income Tax Credit was 2007. And 2007 data, the average lump sum given to families with children was $3,582. Now, rather than giving a increase in hourly wages, the thought has been to just give them that lump sum. The thought is that if you receive a check of this magnitude, you're more likely to think that it's important and that you need to save it. Unfortunately, research has shown that 2/3 of all funds that people receive from Earned Income Tax Credit are spent within the first 3 months. So 2/3 of all people spend it in the first 3 months. Research has also shown that people that receive that money, if they then become unemployed, they just live on that money for longer periods of time rather than going out sooner and trying to find a job. So the lump sum does not cause people to save as they hoped it would, and it actually does cause people that have lost their job to remain unemployed. So my thought is, rather than give this lump sum, just take that money and filter it into the hourly wage, which would be about an increase of $2 an hour. So we could basically give everybody a $2 an hour wage increase for the same cost of producing these checks that people are not saving. What do you think about that? So some things we talked about. I talked about increasing graduation rates, increasing training and education opportunities, really anything that can make somebody more marketable above and beyond just a basic GED. There's more and more competitions. As more jobs become automated and jobs are lost, competition is more and more. As people live longer, competition is more and more. Increase retirement education and tax incentives. This just goes to the fact that the older generation is working longer and longer, some of them because they did not save enough for retirement. September 11th, 2001, so many people lost money in the stock market that never fully recovered, and they're still working to this day. So I think maybe a stronger system for the stock market that doesn't respond as quickly to negative events, as well as tax incentives. I just feel like there's so many more things that can be done other than raising the minimum wage to double to $15 an hour. And I discussed the Earned Income Tax Credit as well, and how revamping that system might be a better alternative, and it would actually use that money to subsidize the minimum wage monthly rather than once a year. So pay now or pay later. So we see this robot here. This one is actually not working right now. There's not any McDonald's where a robot will give you money. This one is kind of a joke, but it's talking about something very important. They are heading more and more towards automation. The thought is that most people would not want to go in and interact with a robot at the front counter or the drive-through window, so there would still be human interaction at the ordering points, but behind the scenes in the kitchen would be robots making the food. So you would see a person, you would talk to a person, but a robot would actually be doing all the work behind the scenes. $15 an hour. Say hello to your replacement. These kiosks are actually all over the country. This one is an example of one at McDonald's. There's thousands of McDonald's across the country, as well as Europe is almost totally like this, where you can go in and order and pay and not talk to anybody, and then they just call your order and you pick up your food. Now these are actually pretty convenient, but there are some dangers to this. You've probably been to Applebee's or Chili's or Red Robin. There are 3 places that now have those ordering tablets on your table where you can actually sit down at your table. You can order your food, you can pay for your food, you can order extra things. If you decide halfway through the meal you want an extra order of onion rings or something, you can order from the tablet and not have to even talk to your waiter. So there's a lot of automated things on the ordering process and the checking out process, which is convenient, but I want us to all think about it to wonder if this is the beginning of something that's going to grow over time. We get comfortable with this and then something else, and then next thing we know, 20 years from now, that robot will be handing us the food at the drive-through window. Do we want that? Do we not want that? Just something to think about. Cheers to everyone who fought for $15 an hour minimum wage. You have given so many out-of-work machines jobs to feed their families. I couldn't help but resist putting in a Leonardo DiCaprio meme, but it is something to think about. EITC. Now this is interesting. EITC is the first fully automated restaurant, so the future is already here. You can actually order online, you can go in and order at the kiosk to the left. You see there's an automated tablet right there, and then those little doors to the right is actually where food would be. So you can order food and it's just like a mailbox. You'll walk up to your mailbox and get your food. So the cooks are behind the scenes. You don't see them. You don't interact with them. You order noodles, and noodles show up in the little mailbox, and you open the door and get out your noodles and have your food, and you never talk to a person whatsoever. This is the first one. It opened in San Francisco in 2015. So what is the best solution? It's hard. This was a major part of the political debate. It seems like it comes up every political cycle. There's always people below the poverty line. It does not, minimum wage does not adjust with inflation. And, it's rough. We're in a capitalist society where companies are for profit, and any increase in the raise, they're not just going to want to eat that out of their profit. They're going to want to find other ways to cut. So we are in a really complex, dynamic issue, but I think rather than putting money in everybody's pockets, which would only help superficially, we need to look more at the root of the problem. So these are references, a little bit more in-depth reference to the materials that I discussed in this presentation for you to review at another time. There's more references continued. I do know that I didn't cover all areas. It's kind of a large topic, and I was trying to focus in on just a few things, but I hope I at least created some doubt in your mind. That was my goal, that the $15 an hour is not the solution, and that we maybe need to look into other institutions to fix those, and then that would be more beneficial than just throwing the money on the top there to try to plug that hole to stop that leaky bucket. So thank you very much for taking the time to view this presentation. I appreciate it very much.